Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome someone who's been an actor, a screenwriter, set designer, among many, many other things, and she's also the best-selling author of over 40 books. Please help me welcome Barbara Bottner. Barbara, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me. It's closer to 50 books.
That's what I saw. I did see that. Yes.
Yeah.
I read two different things. The one that was over 50 or that it was close to 50, so I wasn't sure which one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a lot to cover, but this is the first time you and I are speaking face to face, even though I've had a lot of interaction with you before. We did an anthology together, actually, which you were nice enough to participate in. But as I said, it's the first time speaking like this, so I was looking forward to it. So again, thank you for coming on.
Happy to be here.
Well, so we have a lot to cover because looking at your career, you don't even know where to start since you've done so much of everything. But I've always liked to start by going back with people. So you're from New York originally. You grew up in Great Neck, the five towns there?
Long Island, Great Neck, yeah. And then moved into the city and lived in the city for a long time.
Oh, you lived in the city as well. So
yeah.
So what did your parents do?
It's funny you should ask. My father was an exec with Revlon, and he was one of these first-generation Jewish guys from the Bronx who really very ambitious, wanted to make it big, and did, and was close with Charles Revson, and lived a pretty fancy lifestyle. But our family split up, so it wasn't exactly a dream childhood. But, I come from, that's the kind of stock I come from. I got some of his ambition, I guess.
So what was your family life like, I guess, and in particular with regard to Judaism? I mean, were you observant at all growing up? We
were conservative, but we were really probably more in practice reform. We went to temple on the high holidays. The women showed off their minks. That's what it seemed to me. That's what religion seemed to me to be about, like who had the best fur coat. And it's very typical of those times because actually during that time in this country, the Jews had a mandate, which was to thrive, to build a family, to succeed. And being spiritual was just way not the focus of the moment. So, in my case, it did not turn me on to Judaism per se. I have a spiritual life that's profound, but I always say the Jews had me first. And, I feel Jewish to my core.
Right.
I'm one of these people who, when we watch television, they'll go, she's Jewish, he's Jewish. I'm like my own grandmother, basically.
I do the same. I do that with my kids too. I point out which one is and which one isn't. So you've done so many things. Okay, like we were talking about, acting and writing among them. So when you were a kid, what did you prefer? Did you think I want to be an actress? Because it seems like that's the direction that you went in first.
No, well, it was very accidental. All of it was accidental. I was an art girl. I always drew from the get-go. And I danced, and dancing for me was another world because it was beautiful, it was calm, it was musical, and I was pretty good at it. So I was a little ballet kid. I didn't have the stamina to really pursue a full-on career, and I knew that pretty early on. But that sense of being in another world was very important to me, just as an artist in general. And like I say, I always drew. So my idea from high school was that I was going to go to art school, and I got into Pratt, but I wanted to get away from my family, so I went to school in Boston, and I was an art major, and I never dreamed of writing. It was never a goal, never a thought, because the kind of degree I had, I graduated University of Wisconsin with a year abroad in Paris. I never had an English course the whole time I was in college. I didn't have one single course. So I started to write because I wanted to illustrate books for children. Well, I got into the theater accidentally.
I'm going to ask you about that. Yeah, I saw you did that as well.
Yeah, I got into the theater very accidentally. I knew some people. We were all hanging out. People, it was very fluid. It was in the 60s. People were reinventing themselves every other day, as was I. And yeah, so I got interested in kids' books, and I thought, oh,
Let me go back to the theater. We'll get to the kids' book. So, first of all, I'm just curious. Like, you were a kid. You were like into this. Were there like people that you admired growing up? Like, in creatives, like either acting or writing or anything like that.
Dancers, beautiful Russian ballet dancers. That's and I had a Russian ballet teacher who was a tremendous character. Yeah, and I was a reader. I was always a reader. But I don't know if you read any of my novel, but in the novel it talks about what a struggle it was to grow up in that family. So, yeah, so movies, books, all the usual artistic escape hatches.
So you mentioned that you studied in Boston, but I was reading you also studied in France, right?
Yeah, I invented a year abroad because I was going to the university. I was at Wisconsin at the time, and it was very, very, very cold. Even though I'm from New York, it was very cold. And I had a friend who was a French major, and she was going to take a year, sort of designed by the university abroad. And I decided that I should go with her. So I told my father that the university was sending me to Paris. I had to go. They were sending me. And I told the university that my father insisted that I spend a year in France. So I was so bold and so confident that it happened. And I ended up spending a year in France at an atelier on the left bank. And I painted all day. And I lived with, eventually I met someone that I went to high school with, who's now a filmmaker, and he had two roommates, and I ended up moving in. So I had a sort of Jules Jim kind of year with three guys, four motorcycles, apartment on the left bank. It wasn't too bad.
So you weren't like nervous just to go off like this, just to France at all, just for like no nerve wracking at all?
No, at the time, it was nerve wracking growing up in my house. So everything outside the front door for me was easier. Yeah.
So let me go back to because you said you worked on stage. So you worked as a set designer, right, on off-Broadway shows?
Yes, it's another thing I fell into because I think I had a boyfriend and he was an actor and I was an artist. And so I somehow got the job to do the sets on this off-Broadway show. And what happened was the sets were so enormous and so overpowering that they overpowered what was going on the stage. And that became a clue to me that I wanted to be on stage because I sort of blotted out what was going on. I mean, it wasn't conscious, of course. So, so I did some sets and then I decided, maybe I'll try acting. So I studied a little bit. I got into a troupe on the Lower East Side called Cafe La Mama, which at the time was a very well-known troupe started by Ellen Stewart, who was an innovator in the theater. Her hair started at that theater. It was a remarkably important piece of theater history, actually. And I was in the troupe, and from there we toured Europe, and we were on the London stage, and it was pretty amazing. I was a neophyte, but we did something called, your people probably won't know what this is, but if you've seen My Dinner with Andre, which was out many years ago, Andre Glutowski, he had a method of training actors, which was a huge warm up that took a long, long time. It was basically tumbling and relational activities between people. This was all unscripted, improvised. And so I was trained in that way, and it went on for a couple of years, and it was a blast.
So, what places did you go to in Europe?
Sorry, what?
What places did you go to in Europe when you were touring?
Oh, we debuted on the West End in London, and we played there, and then we went to Amsterdam, and we were in a theater right outside of Amsterdam in a town called something like Lunensloot, something like that, and we would take our bikes from where we were staying and pedal through the beautiful countryside, and do the show, and it was, I don't want to say what year because it so dates me, but it was a lot of free love, and there was, in Amsterdam specifically, things were very loose, and we were about, I don't know, we were about maybe 10 people in the troupe, a couple of musicians, the director, actor, like that. Yeah, and then we did some colleges here in the United States as well.
Well, those fascinating experiences, like that's like amazing. So you were doing all this stuff. So what led you into writing? I mean, that's the thing that I'm curious now, because you were on a path. I mean, did you ever consider just that I want to continue being an actor?
You know, what happened, well, you don't know, it's a terrible phrase. What happened was in the troupe, and the director, who I'm still friends with, admits that it was quite misogynistic. It was really a boys' club, and it was pretty hard to feel relaxed. So what happened was, in one of these rehearsals, which was very physical, as I mentioned, I ended up breaking my leg in 3 places, which was my way of saying, I don't want to be here, I think. In New York, in the winter, in the sleet, I had a cast up to my hip.
Wow.
So I had to sit down and stop doing what I was doing. And that's when I started to think about drawing again as my primary talent really was drawing. But when I went, so I had an art portfolio where I was a painter, so the portfolio was huge, and that's not how you get a job as an illustrator in New York. So I had to kind of learn what to do, how to put together a portfolio. And when I went around to the publishers, and back then you could just knock on the door and get an appointment with the art director, and say, "Here I am. I'm young and I want to talk to you." And they said something to me that was really helpful. They said, you should write your own stories, because although I was an illustrator, I wasn't the best illustrator that ever lived. I was pretty good, but I wasn't amazing. And they basically said to me, write your own stories and then you'll give yourself a job. Because otherwise I'm competing with others for some other manuscript, right? So that was the first time it ever occurred to me to write a story. And I wrote one and then another story, and the third story I wrote, which I illustrated, because back then you still do, put together a book dummy. You do the illustrations for the manuscript. So I put together a book dummy, and the book, which got published, was called What Would You Do with a Giant? And I went around to Random House, and there was a very famous editor there called Fabio Cone, and he was Italian and very mannered and very debonair and everything. And he looked at my book dummy, and he said something like, "Who are you? You just came in off the street. I mean, you want me to publish this? I've never heard of you. Why should I publish this book?" And so he sent me off with the understanding that he was considering publishing the book. He was not ready, because I blew it off the street, basically.
Right.
And then I went to another publishing house and they took the book. But I'll never forget that interview, because he was so sure that I was not for him. And then I also, during that early time, like I said, I have a little of my father's blood in me. The New York Times had a very, very famous children's book editor called George Woods, and he was there for decades. And he was famous for a couple of things. He was famous because he had 13 children with the same woman. Oh my God, sorry. He had 13 children with the same woman, and he was an alcoholic. And he was a wonderful editor of children's books. And I wrote to him and I said, well, I had one book out, and I already had a job at Parsons teaching, because that was sometimes in life, things just fall into place. It wouldn't be my phone either. So So anyway, I wrote to George Woods, and he wrote me back again. I was a woman also, a young woman, and that was challenging. So I wrote to him, and we had this back and forth many times, real letters, actual post mail letters, and he finally agreed to meet me, and I did end up doing some reviews for the New York Times, and also after one book, I was up at an advertising agency again because I was an illustrator, and the guy out of the blue said to me, "You should teach. This is within 10 minutes of meeting this person. This is what I mean. This is how Beshert, we say, right? This is what Beshert." So this guy says, you should teach. And I say, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah." And he sends me down to the Parsons School of Design. And he says, "Talk to the dean. He's my friend." And with my one book and my illustration portfolio, I go down to 13th Street. And as I'm going through the turnstile to get into the building, there's a man leaving that same turnstile. When I get to see the dean, and I wish I could remember his name, he was a wonderful man. The dean, I say, "I want to teach." He says, "Do you have any experience?" I say, "No." But I like people. And anyway, the guy who was leaving had just left as the teacher of children's books, writing and illustration. The turnstile that let me in the building had just pulled him out into the street. They had nobody to teach the class, and he gave it to me.
That's amazing.
And I've been teaching for 50 years.
That's incredible. You've had a lot of fortuitous things happen to you as well. So,
well, when you're on the right path, I think that the universe kind of steps in sometimes.
So you started writing, and then I saw that you had this whole career in writing for TV as well. I mean, so I'm curious how that all happened, how that transitioned, because one of the things that's funny with you is that I told you I do another podcast also where I interview a lot of celebrities, and almost like a lot of the times when I'm interviewing them, I see on their social media, you're friends with them. So it's like, I have to hear about all this experience. So how did you get into TV to begin with?
When I came out here, a lot of my friends were doing film and television.
What prompted you to go out to LA to begin with?
I'm sorry, what?
What prompted you to move out to LA?
Oh, I had broken up with my boyfriend. I had done a few films for Sesame. I won an international award for films for Sesame Street.
I was going to ask about that
because
too.
animation was a very logical outgrowth of illustrating and storytelling, basically. And I loved animation. It was before it became what it is today, commercial. People were doing fascinating independent films and just very, wonderful films for Electric Company and Sesame Street. And I also got to have a wonderful evening with Jim Henson. If we have time, I can tell you about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Jim Henson also, yes.
So I had made these little films, so I had put my toe into the filmmaking world, and a lot of my friends had moved from New York out here to pursue film, and it just seemed like a logical thing to do. I really wanted to get out of the city. It was a heartbreaking breakup. Right. Still a good friend of mine, but still difficult. So I came out here, and because I was in children's content, it was logical that I would try to do some work in children's television, which I did. But I also ended up on a sitcom. But right. Out here, you're in the jello. You're in the entertainment jello. Everybody's doing something in entertainment, and everybody knows everybody, and you hear about things. And I guess I just had sort of unbridled ambition. I thought I could do everything, and I just kept going for it. I took a class at UCLA in comedy writing, and then the teacher, who was a well-known comedy writer, had a lot of credits, decided to write with me. So that was great, and that was a very helpful thing. But it's not actually what got me a job in comedy. I finally, I really, you have a bucket list, and I thought I was funny. I thought I could write it. I wrote what we call a spec script out here for Taxi, and then I wrote another one for Wonder Years. Both of those were pretty good script. I've got an agent. You go around to go to programs at the Writers Guild, you meet agents, there's a whole, it's an industry town here, right?
Right.
I got an agent, and he set me up for one job, and I got the job. So I was on a comedy for like, it was a 13-week. It never got
Yeah, I
reviewed.
was gonna ask about that as well. I saw that. That's fascinating. So let's go back to Sesame Street. How did you get into Sesame Street to begin with?
Again, well, okay, so I must have heard that they were looking for storyboards, it was actually for the electric company, which was alongside of Sesame Street. They were looking for storyboards. And I heard that because I knew people who were both in kids' books and in animation. So I put together some storyboards. And okay, let me back up. Before I did the storyboards, I was interested in animation, and on 46th Street in New York, it was an animation street, and that's where all the studios were. Or maybe that was the Jewelry Street. It was right next to the Jewelry Street.
Okay.
So anyway, it was one street of all animation studios. I went in with my portfolio to see if I was ready to serve coffee. I just wanted to learn. And I got every place turned me down. I was a woman. It was 1970.
Mm-hmm.
I got turned down by everyone, and not a second thought. Right then, I heard that Sesame Street was looking for storyboards. I put together these 3 storyboards. I go up to the offices, and they buy 3 storyboards. So now I have to produce them. Now I have very little experience. Now I go back to 46th Street to the same studios that would not give me a job, bringing them coffee, and I say, bid on these 1-minute films. Can you bid on these films for me? So the exact places that would not have me, I now had to hire one of them, which I did. So that was a very sweet women's lib moment.
Yeah.
1973, it probably was.
Wow. So, okay, so you just mentioned, I was going to ask about that anyway. Like, I'm so like amazed, like, because you wrote a song for a Muppets album. All right, so how did that happen? And you had
Okay, so it was my boyfriend at the time. He's a musician, and he did a wonderful album. I can see it right now, called Fair is Fair. And so he's a writer, and he's a songwriter and musician. And I said, as usual, this strange confidence. Oh, I'd like to write a song. So I did.
Yeah, that's right.
We wrote 2 songs together. He wrote all the songs on the album except for 2. So I did one for Oscar the Grouch, and I did one for Bert and Ernie. And they're so cute. They're really, really cute. They're great characters. And I eventually I did write for Winnie the Pooh. Okay, but it's when you have beautifully designed characters like the characters Jim Henson designed and Winnie the Pooh characters. You can learn those characters. It's not that hard to learn what the writer is doing to create these characters. So, you just immerse yourself in their mentality, and you can take it on. So and that's what you do in sitcom. They're established. It's very different than being a writer creating your own characters. You're studying somebody else's conglomerate, and then you apply yourself. So it's a really fun thing to do.
So, okay, so let me hear about this dinner that you had with Henson.
Wait, I lost the last thing.
Let me hear. You did you wrote the
Jim
songs
Henson?
with you said you went out to eat with Jim Henson.
I did. I had an amazing evening with Jim Henson. So at the time, so this is all in the same period in the probably mid-70s.
Okay.
Jim had this, Sesame Street was up and running. I was going up there for some job. I don't remember what, but he hired people all the time, writers and puppeteers, everything. So I was up there for something, and he was being interviewed. I don't think it was. He was being interviewed. I thought it was the New Yorker, but it may have been a different paper. And my time with him, my appointment kept being postponed because it was a long interview. So it got to be late in the day. 5:30 or something, and I still hadn't gotten in for my appointment. It turned out he had tickets that night to the theater, and it turned out that his wife had a cold. So she was supposed to come down from Riverdale to be with him. And he just turned to me and he said, "Do you want to get dinner and go to the theater?" And of course, he walked on water, and he did. He really did walk on water. So I had this full evening with him, and, he was just the most charming, most brilliant man.
Amazing.
Just a real, he was the prince of a man. And what I remember, one thing I remember about that evening is he was interested in, there was a channeler at the time, someone who sort of got information, brought it down from the ethers and could tell you about the future. And one of these channelers was called Seth, and he was reading the Seth book. And I was so impressed that here Jim Henson, who could do anything, was still a seeker.
So, okay, so all these things are just one thing after another. It's fantastic with you. So you just mentioned that you wrote for Winnie the Pooh. So I want to hear about that, because when you write for a big property like that, for, like Disney thing, do you have to follow like certain guidelines? Like, that they tell you who can only do this, you can't have Eeyore doing something else. Do they say that you have to be very strict with what you're able to do?
There's a lot of guardrails in television. I mean, it's always been that way. And it's the same in comedy. I mean, in comedy, you have something called a table read, which is the first time the script is broken out with the actors and the director. And you have a table read, and then the suits come in, and they're called the suits, and it's the networks come in. Right. And they listen in on the table read, and they tell you what can and can't be there. And it's always been like that. With Winnie the Pooh, and there's also something called the Bible, which is for every show. So you get the Bible, and so by the time you're sitting down to write, you pretty well know, what the parameters are. You're not going to make a lot of mistakes. And like I said, the characters are so well drawn. You have, it's a coloring book. You have the outlines there, right, and you see what the characters are. So yeah, it's not like a negative thing where you feel they're on your back, because you go in.
No, I wasn't saying that, but I figured that there would be some things. Who can only be doing this? He cannot be doing something else. Like, that they tell you within the guidelines that you have to follow, because it's such an iconic character, beloved character.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of pushback. We had a showrunner, and so we wrote. She looked at everything. And I also wrote for Mrs. Pigglewiggle, which was another, I don't know if that was Disney, but that was another all established characters. Yeah, I don't remember getting into a lot of trouble about that.
What was Disney like in general to work for?
Well, this was Disney Cable, so it was kind of like the cousin of Disney. It wasn't, so it wasn't very heavy-handed. It really wasn't.
Did you get any great Disney perks for working for the company?
No, only that when you go into the lobby, they have the most amazing coffee machines and cappuccino. You can't. It's incredible. That was my perk.
Another fun series that you wrote an episode for, I saw, was Shelley Duvall's Bedtime Stories. I remember that
Bedtime Stories. Yeah. I worked for Shelley.
Did you interact with her at all?
She would buy the book. She would decide which book to buy, and then I actually did. That was the one time I did an animation script per se. She did my book, and then she did. Peggy Rathman was my student, right? So she did Officer Buckle and Gloria in my class. She did all her books in my class, except for the last 2 books, I think. But every book up until then, she did. So I got that book on as well. So Shelley did what was the book that she did of mine? I don't know. Oh, Bootsy Barker, and then she did Officer Buckle and Gloria.
Oh, that's great. Did you interact with her much, with Shelley at all, or no?
There are a lot of in-between people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said you wrote for you were a staff writer on 2 different shows, right? So you said Mrs. Pigglewiggle, and there was also Scorch. So I actually do remember Scorch. I watched that one.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, what's it like to be a staff writer? What are your responsibilities? Do you have to pitch
I'll tell
ideas?
you about that. I've written about this. I mean, I haven't published anything about it, but I wrote about it. Well, first of all, I went into the interview with the showrunners, and they gave me the pilot to read while you're waiting, and I think to myself, this is terrible. This is terrible. I don't want to write this, and I mean, I want a job, but mind you, and I have had no jobs, but I look at this one script and I say, this is not going to work. So of course that's the job I get, right? Because the universe has such a great sense of humor. And well, it was one thing, it was a boys club, and the one other total boys club, and the one other female writer who had she had a lot of experience, and she had agents that really prepared her. She wanted nothing to do with any other female writers. She was going to be so she was like a boy in the boys club, but she was a female writer. It was very challenging. Scenes you would write. Well, you have to pitch your story,
Right.
And everyone's pitching their stories, so it's very, very competitive, and you have to be in the lane of the kind of show they want, which you don't know at the beginning of the show exactly what. In the beginning of the show, you don't really know what the show's going to be because they always evolve.
Right.
So you don't really know what they're looking for. So you're pitching stories, and you're going back and forth with, this could work. Try it this way. Try it that way. There were two showrunners. I think I don't know if this is when I got the job or further on into my job there. When I got the job, this is what happened. They gave me a script, and they asked me for notes on the script. And it's scripts, half-hour scripts are something like 27 pages, right? Something like that. So they give me the script and they ask me to mark it up as a test. This is me getting the job.
Mm-hmm.
So they put me in a room. They leave me there for, it seems like forever. They finally come and get me. And it's two guys, and they're both pros. They've been in the business forever. And they're showrunners, and they're made incredible amounts of money. So they say, okay, act one, what do you got? Now, I've been a teacher by then for a long, long time, and I'm used to helping people, and I'm used to people listening to me. So I have opinions ready to go out the door, right? And so I go, well, pages, 1 to 7, that worked, except the turn on page 8 was very weak. And I'm going on. And one of the guys is like glowing as I'm talking. And then I get to the second act, and I'm saying, well, I just don't believe a character would say this and this and that. And now the other showrunner is glowing. And so, and at one point, one of them takes me out for coffee, in the studio. They take me for coffee, and they say, we've had guys in here who've been doing this for 20 years, and your notes are the best we've ever seen, blah, 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 blah,
That's
right?
great.
That's the guy who's glowing, right? Now I go back, and I give the rest of the notes to the other guy. So it turned out that these guys were basically in competition, and I put my foot in my mouth. Anything that I said, put my foot in my mouth with one guy and I had a halo with the other guy. It was insane. So, I have friends who have written comedy, and we know that there are some shows, like Seinfeld had a show of being a really good room, a good room to be in. So there's cooperation, people are enjoying themselves, pitching jokes. Some rooms are devastatingly hard to be in. And Scorch was one of those rooms. But also, for me, the conceit of that show was very hard to work with, and that's why it only lasted for one 13-week session.
So, I mean, you were on this path. So what made you say, I don't want to do this anymore? I mean, what made you say, I don't want to continue in this field?
Well, the show ended.
Right.
Because it wasn't renewed. So this is this one job I had, and the show ended. So I was out of a job. So then I had to decide, do I want to submit to that kind of very competitive, anti-female, difficult experience. And, it was on my bucket list, and I got to check it off. So I was done. Yeah. I mean, I was always expecting, I was writing for the LA Weekly. I was doing book reviews. I was doing essays. I was always doing something. So it wasn't like I lost my wings because I couldn't write
Sure.
more comics.
Well, you've written, like we said before, like close to 50 books already. So
50. Big
what,
old.
50, let's 50. Okay, yes. Okay, so what is it about writing for kids that appeals to you? I mean, why that genre? What is it that about that you really enjoy?
You know, I hate that phrase, because you don't know when you're talking to someone. So what happened to me was childhood was difficult. And and as a teacher and as a writer, I think it's true that you write from where there are issues you're trying to understand. You write from where there's a rub, where there's discomfort. That's what makes you. That's one of the things that makes you want to figure things out and give voice to things. And so, given that I had this very challenging childhood, I had a lot of what we call material because
Okay.
there were a lot of things I needed to figure out about what happened to me. And they weren't all dark and terrible. I mean, for picture books, you're not writing really, really dark things. But, I wrote a book called Messy. I wrote stuff about being a would-be dancer. But the angst that I carried in me was an activator in terms of story. And that's what I have always taught my students. Go where the screaming is the loudest. Because I mean, I've had times in my life that were perfect, fabulous. I rarely wanted to write about those times because I don't know what I would write about. It all happened, and it's beginning, middle, end. It was wonderful. I don't have very much to say about it. So it's because of that angst and trying to wend my way out of a sort of a dark place. And I only was writing picture books for many, many years. But then, I got interested in the craft of writing, and that's what took me more. I wrote some chapter books, and I wrote I Can Reads, and I just, that's when I fell in love with writing. After I had written a bunch of picture books, I had editors that were interested in working with me, interested in helping me, and so it grew. It exploded.
But you write a lot. So you're saying you write a lot about your own experiences also. It comes from your past, a little bit, your history, your feelings. So you find it's like a lot of, because I do. I mean, do you find it's a lot of catharsis for you a little bit to like bring out your own, like, I guess, history?
Yeah, because well, I think writers are always using themselves one way or the other, even if it isn't completely on the face of it. Um, but yeah, because I'm a complicated person, and I've had to be a seeker my whole life to sort of grow out of the traumas that I did experience. So there's a lot of, like I said, material. It's also where humor comes from. Being Jewish, we know that.
Yes.
That's how that's how we shine the light. So yeah, and for a long time I was kind of limited. Like all my characters were in the first person. They were pretty much in alignment with things that I've lived through. Then as I got to be a more mature writer, I could take on other things that were not as close. I'm writing about a white supremacist now, so I'm not, trapped anymore in my own.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people the same thing. Because one of my books was like I finished it when my dad was dying of cancer. So it was like, it's you can lose yourself in the book. So I always tell people like, I can't control anything that happens out there. At least here, I'm in control. I'm in charge of what happens. So it is definitely a kind of like catharsis for
Yeah,
me, at least, right? So, and
yeah,
you're a teacher now too. You mentioned it before also. So you're teaching. You have a lot of famous students who've gone on to become
yeah.
accomplished writers. So like tell me about what you teach and how rewarding is it for you to see that someone you taught has now gone on to make it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, yeah, I needed to be a teacher in this lifetime. I really needed to find a way to come out of myself, to offer something to other people. It was very, very healing for me as a soul, as a person. Very healing. Um, at first it was, I think I can do this, I need the money. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing really, but I remember I was teaching at the new school, Otis Parsons School of Design it was. And I remember early on, one of my students, they were drawing and writing both. And one of my students put a drawing up on the board. And I remember looking at this drawing. It was animals and it was people. And the animals were really well drawn, and the humans were not well drawn. And I remember saying to her, something about you like animals. I mean, I see how this character is so alive. And it was something that I felt like I was channeling. I was able to see something and offer it, and it worked. And so I'll tell you what some of my assignments. One of my first successful students was Bruce Deegan, who was a high school teacher at the time and did not like being a high school teacher. And he came into my class, and I saw his work, and I remember telling him, Bruce, you don't have to worry. You're not going to have to be a high school teacher. You got this. Yeah. Yeah. So that way he was, yeah. So I gave assignments. I came up with a bunch of assignments. I had a woman who was just a very gifted storyteller. She was an older woman, and she could tell a story about a pen. She was just a gifted person, and she came in every single week with a new story, and they were one after the other really good. I finally said to her name was Charlotte, I said, Charlotte, write about something personal. These are great, but just find something personal. So she wrote a book. She might have been illustrating too. And it was about, I can't exactly remember, but this book that she wrote got published. The book where I asked her to really dig into her own self. It was something about escaping a room. I don't remember very much, but I had editors come in also, and none of the other stories got published. But when she got closer to herself, she found something that was really worth sharing. So because I'm a self-taught writer, I had to discover how it is that I think about story. Mm-hmm. And so it's autodidact, a total autodidact. So I invented these assignments that really were very helpful to people. I mean, we call them prompts now, but these people were writing and illustrating. So I just felt like if people could get going, like instead of looking at a paper and going, what am I supposed to write about? I also said, I told you that already. Go where the screaming is the loudest. Yeah. So I invented these assignments. One of them was two characters who can't see each other through there's a wall between two characters, and they have to talk to each other. I know at least 2 books got published from that particular assignment. Peggy's book, Officer Buckle, that came out of an assignment which was something is happening in the pictures that if you just read the manuscript, you'd have no idea what the story was. So it's the visual component that tells the story. So in Officer Buckle, you have the dog doing all these crazy tricks, but if you read the manuscript, you wouldn't know there's the dog. So that was an assignment that a lot of people got books out of. Barney Salzberg was my student.
I went to an Israel trip with Barney.
Yeah, that's right. I know that.
Yeah.
I know. He's a very good friend. He mentioned that. Robin Price Glasser was my student. I mean, Antoinette Portis now has a show on Apple TV. And now I'm teaching mostly novels. And Cammie Gordon is my student. She just published 2 YAs out of our little clutch of writers. Yeah, it's been incredible. It's been so wonderful. Yeah, and it's good to get out of your own self-involvement,
You've done so many things. I mean, any memoirs in the future?
People ask me that a lot, honestly. I get the feeling you didn't dive into my novel, Jonathan.
I have not finished your novel. I started reading like snippets to talk with you about, but
Okay, all right. Yeah, because that in a way is a memoir an emotional? The tone of it is like an emotional memoir.
But they're more like what you said is like more like essays, kind of.
Yeah.
I think, because I was looking at your resume, your credentials, and I was like, like, wow, I mean, this should really be all out there.
Yeah, it's funny. I will say this. A friend of mine many years ago in the 70s, she was at NYU's film school. She had to make a short film. She decided to make it on me. She came to she told me, and I said,
saw
fine.
that too. That's amazing that you had a film about you.
Yeah, it's a 6-minute film. It's a wonderful film. But what happened was I waited for her. She's always been late. She's a late person. I waited for her all day to make this film, and she didn't come, and I went to bed. And then knocking on the door, like 11 o'clock at night, she comes in with a sound man and a cameraman, and she puts the mic under my chin, and I start talking, and she made this wonderful movie where it's a pan of my loft, which is full of my paintings and all my. So people have seen that and said, "Oh, there's more of a movie to be made here." But it's a lot of. I've sat down a couple of times to write a memoir, and I get bored because I lived it. I love talking about it. It's easy for me to talk about, but as an act of creation, it doesn't thrill me. It's just not a creative thing for me to relive all of that. It's just, yeah. I mean, if someone followed me around for a while, yeah, there'd be something there. But no, I'm not going to write it. It's dinner party. It has to be dinner party stories at this point.
Well, I mean, I'm fascinated. Like I said, I was looking through all the things that you've done. Like, I can't wait to ask about this. I can't wait to ask about that. So it's very fascinating. So here's the most important question that everyone likes to know about. Everyone likes to get out. How can people follow you on social media?
I'm just on Facebook. That's all. The old people's social media.
Well, you have a website too, Barbara.
So. Oh, I have a website. Yeah, BarbaraHBottner.com is my website. Yeah. It's just not a very active website. It's there. It's a good reference. The website is a good reference. It has a lot of bibliography, but I'm not doing much on it.
There's a lot of good information in it. I use that as well. But, well, Barbara, I want to thank you again for coming on. It's, such a treat to get to talk to you. I mean, hear all the stories. I was fascinated when I was reading all of this, and I said, I can't wait to ask about this. So I do want to thank you.
Jonathan.
So
it's good to talk to you.
Yes, no, good to talk to you. And I and you and I have talked. Maybe we have something else in the future, perhaps, to do together. So let's see.
All right.
So, all right. Well, again, this has been the Jewish
And
Lens.
good luck with your work, Jonathan.
Well, thank you. Well, hold up a second. I'll sign us off. All right. This has been the Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. Again, a very special thanks to Barbara Bottner. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to the Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.